Alexander's world was built on power, wealth, and control. But that all changed when he walked into an empty office late one night and stumbled upon someone, that would turn everything upside down. There, in the most unlikely place, he found Maria, a cleaning lady, asleep on the bathroom floor. It was a moment so raw, so vulnerable, that it struck him deep. What he didn't know was that this chance encounter would be the beginning of something he never saw coming. Before we dive into today's story, if you're new to the channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an amazing story. And if you're already part of the family, thank you for being here. Let's get started with today's incredible journey. Alexander Hart, the CEO of one of the most successful tech companies in the country, had everything a man could want. His office was a towering masterpiece of glass and steel, overlooking the city skyline that stretched endlessly in every direction. His calendar was filled with meetings, investments, and negotiations, while his luxurious home provided a constant reminder of the life he had built from the ground up. But despite all the power and wealth that came with his position, something was missing, a sense of fulfillment that no amount of success could provide. Alexander had always been a man of ambition, a man whose every move was calculated to ensure his company's growth and his personal legacy. Yet, behind the polished suits and the ever-present smirk, he was often alone. His relationships had been nothing more than brief encounters or shallow connections, all drowned in the sea of his professional obligations. The loneliness had become a constant companion, but it was one he never spoke of. His colleagues admired him, his competitors feared him, but no one truly knew him. His life, though enviable from the outside, felt like a carefully curated image of success, hiding a void that only he knew existed. One evening, after a particularly grueling board meeting, Alexander found himself lingering in the office long after everyone else had gone home. The building, once alive with the bustle of employees and conversations, now stood eerily quiet. That's when he stumbled upon something unexpected, something that would forever change the course of his life. It was well past midnight when Alexander decided to take a walk through the office floors. The building was silent, the lights dimmed, casting long shadows across the polished floors. Normally, he would retreat to his penthouse after a long day, but tonight was different. There was an unease in him, a feeling he couldn't shake, no matter how much he tried to drown it out with work. He needed a break, a few moments of solitude away from the expectations that constantly weighed him down. As he wandered through the halls, he passed by a cleaning closet, hearing the faint sound of a mop being dragged across the floor. He wasn't used to hearing such sounds at this hour. Most of the janitorial staff had already finished their shifts by now. His curiosity led him to the open door. What he saw inside made him stop dead in his tracks. In the small, dimly lit bathroom, a cleaning lady was fast asleep on the toilet. Her uniform was wrinkled and her head rested against the cold ceramic of the bathroom wall. She had clearly collapsed from exhaustion, her body curled up in the most unlikely of places. Her breathing was steady, but the image of her so vulnerable in a place so out of place caught him off guard. He had seen the cleaning staff around the building countless times, but never had he paid much attention to them. They were just part of the background, working tirelessly behind the scenes to keep the office spotless. But now, in the quiet solitude of the night, he saw her differently. She wasn't just a figure in a uniform. She was a woman, exhausted from her long hours, seeking refuge in the only place that offered her a brief moment of rest. Alexander stood there, motionless, watching her for several moments. His initial reaction was shock, followed by a strange mixture of guilt and empathy. Here he was, the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company, yet he had never considered what the staff went through. How many times had he passed them by without a second thought? How many times had he failed to see their struggles? The sight of this woman, this cleaning lady, brought everything into perspective. It was as if time had frozen, and for the first time, Alexander truly saw the world outside of his high-powered bubble. He didn't know her name, but there was something about her that made him feel deeply connected to her. He could tell she wasn't young. The lines on her face told a story of hard work, of sacrifices made to survive. Her shoes, worn and frayed at the edges, were a clear sign of the long hours she worked. She had no idea he was standing there, quietly observing. The vulnerability of the moment made him hesitant to wake her, unsure of what to do next. But he couldn't just walk away. This was a moment that would haunt him if he ignored it, a moment that would forever change his perception of the world around him. He took one last look at her before slowly backing out of the room, closing the door quietly behind him. As Alexander made his way back to his office, the image of the sleeping cleaning lady remained with him. It lingered in his mind, overpowered his thoughts, and drew him into an unfamiliar world of empathy. He had always prided himself on his ability to control every aspect of his life, but this had shaken him. The cleaning lady's name was Maria. She had worked at the building for several years, cleaning the floors, the bathrooms, and every corner of the office that the employees never noticed. Her life had always been a struggle, one filled with obstacles that seemed insurmountable, but she kept pushing forward, determined to provide for her family. Maria was in her late 30s, a woman whose body showed the wear and tear of years of hard work. Every day was a constant battle, getting up early to take care of her children, then working long hours to make enough money to keep a roof over their heads. Her job, though necessary, offered little more than a paycheck. She had no luxury of breaks, no time for herself. The office, with its sleek modern design and immaculate cleanliness, was a world apart from her own. At home, things were just as difficult. Maria had 2 children, both of whom she adored, but the struggle to provide for them was overwhelming. She lived in a cramped apartment on the outskirts of the city, far from the high-rise offices where the world's elite did business. Every night after coming home from work, she would prepare dinner, help her kids with their homework, and then collapse into bed, only to do it all over again the next day. There was no room for herself, no time to dream. All her hopes were focused on giving her children a better life, one that was free from the same hardships she had endured. The exhaustion from the constant grind had started to take its toll on her health. The long hours at the office cleaning the floors and bathrooms, bending over and scrubbing had left her body aching. But it wasn't just her physical pain that wore her down. It was the emotional weight of it all. Every day she faced the reality that she was stuck in a job that offered no future. She had tried to better her situation in the past, looking for other work or further education, but the chances were slim. The demands of life, combined with the lack of opportunity, kept her in a cycle she couldn't break. Maria had learned to be tough, to hide her struggles behind a smile, but it wasn't easy. On nights when she was particularly tired, she found herself seeking refuge in the bathrooms of the building. They were quiet and peaceful, a place where no one bothered her, a place where she could catch a few minutes of rest before she had to start cleaning again. It wasn't much, but it was the only escape she could find. Her body had begun to crave these brief moments of stillness, where she could close her eyes and forget for a while. On that particular night, after another grueling shift, Maria found herself exhausted beyond measure. The weight of everything, the never-ending work, the worry about her children's future, and the pain in her own body had caught up to her. She sat down on the toilet, her legs aching from standing all day, and let herself fall into a light sleep, her head resting against the cold tile wall. It wasn't ideal, but it was the only place she could find peace. She never expected anyone to notice. After all, Who would look at a cleaning lady like her, let alone care about the struggle she faced every single day? She had come to accept that her life was simply a series of hard days that blended into one long, tiring journey. But little did she know, someone had seen her. Someone had taken notice of the woman behind the uniform, the woman who, despite her hardships, continued to push forward. What Maria didn't realize as she slept in that bathroom was that, for the first time in a long time, someone saw her not just as a worker, but as a person. Alexander, the man who had everything, had unknowingly stumbled upon the most real, raw version of herself. And in doing so, he was beginning to question everything he thought he knew about his life, his success, and what truly mattered. This moment, this encounter was more than a chance meeting. It was the beginning of something that neither of them could have anticipated. It was the beginning of a connection, one that would blur the lines between their worlds and challenge everything they believed. But at this point, neither of them could foresee how their paths would intertwine and how deeply their lives would be affected by this brief, unexpected moment. The next day, Alexander couldn't shake the image of Maria from his mind. He tried to focus on the tasks at hand, investments, meetings, negotiations, but his thoughts kept drifting back to her, her vulnerability, the way she had been so exhausted that she had sought refuge in the bathroom of the office, haunted him. It wasn't just her physical exhaustion that struck him, but the quiet resignation in her expression. There was a sadness in her eyes that he couldn't quite understand, yet it seemed so familiar. It wasn't like Alexander to dwell on such things. In his world, emotions were distractions, obstacles to success. He was a man who had learned to block out feelings and focus solely on his work. But Maria had broken through his walls in a way no one else had. He had never noticed the struggles of people like her, the people who worked in the shadows of the office, making sure everything was spotless, while others enjoyed the rewards of the work they did. For the first time in a long while, Alexander felt a deep curiosity about another person. He couldn't stop thinking about Maria, who she was, where she came from, and what had led her to this moment in the bathroom. He realized that he didn't even know her name, and yet something inside him urged him to find out. Over the following days, Alexander made an effort to cross paths with Maria. He began taking different routes through the building, hoping to catch a glimpse of her. At first, their interactions were brief. A polite nod, a quiet hello as they passed each other. Maria, of course, didn't know why he was seeking her out. To her, he was just the CEO, the man who worked in the high-rise office while she cleaned the bathrooms and halls. She had seen him before, but their worlds had never overlapped. She kept her head down, focused on her work, as she always did. Then, one afternoon, as Alexander walked through the hallway on his way to a meeting, he saw her again. This time she was mopping the floor in the lobby, moving with the quiet determination that had caught his attention before. Her eyes were tired, but her movements were precise, as if she had done this same routine 1,000 times before. "Maria," Alexander said, his voice catching her off guard. She looked up, startled, unsure of why he had called her name. Yes, Mr. Hart," she responded, her voice soft but polite. I just wanted to say thank you for all the work you do. I don't think I've ever taken the time to notice how hard everyone works around here," he said, fumbling for words. Maria blinked, surprised. She wasn't used to receiving praise from anyone in the building. The staff, mostly invisible to the high-powered executives, were rarely acknowledged. To her, the CEO's words felt foreign. "You're welcome, Mr. Hart," she replied, her tone cautious but respectful. She wasn't sure if he was simply being polite or if he genuinely meant what he said. "I've been meaning to ask, how long have you been working here?" Alexander continued, the curiosity in his voice now unmistakable. "A few years," Maria answered, glancing down at her mop. She wasn't sure where this conversation was going, but something about his tone made her hesitant to brush him off. Alexander nodded thoughtfully. "That's a long time. You must be used to it by now. The work, I mean." Maria shrugged, a quiet sadness creeping into her expression. "It's a job. It pays the bills," she said, her voice quiet but matter-of-fact. Alexander noticed the way her shoulders seemed to sag, the way her words felt like they carried a weight much heavier than the broom she was holding. He wanted to ask more, to understand her better, but he hesitated. What would he say next? How could he possibly relate to a woman like her, a woman who had lived a life so far removed from his own? Instead, he simply nodded and offered a small smile. "Well, I appreciate it, really. The building wouldn't be the same without your work." Maria gave him a small smile in return, but it was tinged with skepticism. She wasn't used to compliments, especially not from someone like him. In her world, people like Alexander were too far removed from her reality to ever truly understand the challenges she faced. As they stood there, the brief exchange lingered in the air between them. Neither of them knew it at the time, but this moment would mark the beginning of something neither could have anticipated. Alexander had started to see Maria as more than just a cleaning lady, and Maria, for the first time, began to see that there was more to Alexander Hart than the powerful CEO who ran the company. Over the next few days, they exchanged more conversations, small talks that turned into deeper discussions about their lives, their hopes, and their struggles. Each time Alexander felt a little more drawn to her. He found himself intrigued by her strength, by the quiet dignity with which she carried herself, despite the harshness of her life. And slowly, Maria began to feel a pull toward him too, though she was careful not to let herself get too close. She knew better than to get caught up in the fantasy of a life with someone like him. But there was something undeniable in their connection. The more they spoke, the more they realized how much they had in common despite their vastly different worlds. Both were searching for meaning, for something more than what their lives had been reduced to. And though they had yet to admit it to themselves, the connection between them was growing stronger with each passing day. The days continued to pass, and with each one, Alexander found himself thinking about Maria more and more. The moments they shared, brief as they were, had stirred something within him. He had spent so much of his life consumed by business, by the relentless pursuit of success, that he had never given much thought to the people around him, the ones who made it all possible, yet remained invisible in the grand scheme of things. Maria's quiet strength and resilience had captured his attention in ways he didn't fully understand. It was more than just her beauty or the warmth in her smile. It was the way she carried herself, despite the burdens she had to shoulder every day. On a particularly cold morning, Alexander arrived at the office earlier than usual. The city was still waking up, and the streets outside were bathed in the soft glow of streetlights. He entered the building, greeted the security staff, and made his way to the elevator. He was about to hit the button for his floor when something stopped him, a soft sound coming from the hallway. Curiosity piqued. He walked toward the noise, unsure of what he might find. As he rounded the corner, he saw her. Maria was sitting on a bench near the elevator lobby, her head resting against the wall, her eyes closed. She looked tired, exhausted even, and for a moment Alexander hesitated. He wasn't sure what to do. He wasn't used to seeing people like this, especially not in the polished halls of his office building. "Maria," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. She opened her eyes, startled. When she saw it was him, she quickly stood up, brushing the wrinkles from her uniform. "Mr. Hart, I didn't mean to—" "No, it's fine," Alexander interrupted, stepping closer. "Are you okay?" Maria blinked, clearly taken aback by his concern. "I'm fine, just a little tired," she replied, her voice quiet. I had to start early today to make sure everything is clean before the staff arrives. Alexander looked at her closely. There was something in her expression that told him she wasn't being entirely honest. He knew exhaustion when he saw it, and Maria was clearly beyond just a little tired. Her eyes were heavy, her movements slow, as if every step she took required more energy than she had left. "You don't have to do this alone," he said gently. The words came out before he could stop them, surprising both of them. Maria gave a small, self-deprecating laugh, though it didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's just my job, Mr. Hart. I've been doing this for years." Alexander frowned. There was something in the way she said it that made him feel like there was more to the story. It wasn't just about the job, it was about the life she had to lead to survive. "I know it's your job," he said, his tone softening, "but that doesn't mean you have to carry the weight of it all on your own." Maria met his gaze for a moment, and something flickered in her eyes, a spark of something that resembled hope, but quickly faded as reality set in. "It's fine," she said again, her voice quieter this time. "Really, I don't want to keep you. You've got work to do." Alexander didn't want to push her, but something inside him refused to let the moment slip away. He didn't know why, but he felt compelled to help her, to offer her something more than just a few kind words. "Come on," he said, gesturing for her to follow him. "I'm going to the cafe downstairs. You should take a break, have some coffee. You've been working all night." Maria hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the idea. I can't. I have to finish cleaning before everyone arrives." Alexander smiled slightly, his eyes narrowing with determination. "Take it from me. You don't have to do it all at once. The world won't end if you take a break. Just come with me for a few minutes. You deserve it." Maria looked at him, uncertainty flickering in her eyes. She wasn't used to people being kind to her, certainly not in the way Alexander was. But there was something about him, something in the way he spoke, the way he wasn't judging her, that made her pause. Maybe she did deserve a break. Maybe she could take a moment for herself without feeling guilty. "Okay," she said finally, her voice quiet. "Just a quick coffee." Alexander led her to the cafe downstairs, a small but cozy space where the staff usually grabbed their morning coffee. As they walked, there was an awkwardness between them, both of them unsure of what to say. Maria had never imagined she'd be having coffee with the CEO of the company she worked for, let alone sharing a conversation with him. It felt surreal, almost as though she had stepped into a dream she couldn't fully comprehend. They sat down at a small table by the window, and Alexander ordered 2 coffees, taking a seat across from her. For a few moments they sat in silence, the hum of the cafe and the soft clink of cups filling the air around them. Finally, Alexander spoke. "You know, you're the first person to make me realize how much I've been missing. I've spent so much of my life focused on work, on numbers, on success, and yet I've overlooked the people who make everything possible." Maria glanced up at him, surprised by his honesty. "You don't owe me an explanation, Mr. Hart. You don't have to apologize." "I'm not apologizing," he said, shaking his head. "I'm just realizing how much I've been missing and how much I've taken for granted." Maria wasn't sure how to respond. She wasn't used to people opening up to her, especially not someone like him. She had always kept her distance from the wealthy executives who came and went through the building. They had their own world, a world far removed from hers. But Alexander seemed different. There was a sincerity in his eyes that made her wonder if, maybe, just maybe, he truly understood. Their conversation shifted slowly at first, then with more ease. They spoke about their lives, Maria sharing little bits of her childhood, the struggles she had faced, the dreams she still clung to despite everything. Alexander opened up too, revealing the loneliness he had often felt despite his success. The pressure of always being the one in control, of never allowing himself to be vulnerable, weighed on him in ways he hadn't realized until now. For the first time in a long time, Alexander felt a connection, genuine, real, and unpretentious. And as they finished their coffee and stood to leave, he couldn't shake the feeling that this moment, this chance meeting, was the beginning of something far more significant than either of them had imagined. Over the next few weeks, the brief moments that Alexander and Maria shared continued to linger in their minds. What had started as a fleeting encounter in a bathroom had blossomed into something deeper, something neither of them expected. Their conversations, once short and polite, now lasted longer, at first in the quiet halls of the building and then, increasingly, in the hidden corners of the office or the small cafe downstairs. Each time they spoke, Alexander found himself opening up in ways he hadn't with anyone in years. Maria's presence was calming, unpretentious. She didn't expect anything from him, and in a world where everyone had an agenda, that was a rarity. There was no pressure to be anything but himself with her. He could talk about his frustrations, his dreams, his fears, things he never shared with anyone. And for Maria, the connection was just as unexpected. She had always kept her distance from the people in the building, believing their world was too far removed from her own. But with Alexander, there was something different. She felt seen in a way she hadn't in years, as though someone was truly paying attention to her, not just the uniform she wore. One evening, Alexander couldn't resist any longer. He wanted to know more about Maria, to understand the story behind the strong, resilient woman who worked tirelessly day in and day out, and yet had so little to show for it. After a late meeting, he waited until the office was mostly empty, then walked down to the janitorial closet, where he knew Maria would be. He found her cleaning a small break room on the floor. "Maria," he called gently, making her look up from the sink, where she was scrubbing a counter. "Mr. Hart?" she said, surprised to see him again. "I was wondering if you'd like to join me for dinner tonight," he asked, his voice casual but filled with a genuine warmth. "I know it's last minute, but I'd like to get to know you better. I think you have a story worth hearing." Maria hesitated. She had never imagined herself sitting down to dinner with someone like him. In her world, people like Alexander Hart belonged in a different stratosphere. People who dined at five-star restaurants, who lived in mansions, who had everything money could buy. She was just a cleaning lady, someone whose life was spent scrubbing floors and wiping down counters, unnoticed by the world around her. But there was something about Alexander's offer that tugged at her. It wasn't the lavishness of the dinner, it was the sincerity in his voice, the way he didn't treat her like she was invisible. For once, someone was interested in her as a person, not as an employee. "Okay," she said quietly, surprised at herself for agreeing. "I'd like that." That night, they met at a small but elegant Italian restaurant, just a few blocks from the office. Maria arrived first, unsure of what to expect. When Alexander walked in, she couldn't help but feel out of place. He looked polished as always in his suit, while she had on a simple dress she'd picked up from a discount store. She felt self-conscious, but Alexander's warm smile immediately put her at ease. "Maria," he greeted her with a smile, pulling out the chair for her. "You look beautiful tonight." Maria blushed, unsure of how to respond. It wasn't something she was used to hearing, especially not from someone like him, but the sincerity in his voice made it impossible to brush off. They sat down, and for the first few minutes they both fumbled through the conversation, unsure of what to say. But as the evening went on, they found a natural rhythm. Maria shared stories about her childhood, how she had grown up in a small town and worked odd jobs to help her family. She talked about her children, her dreams for them, and how much she wanted them to have a better life than she had. "I never imagined this life for myself," she confessed quietly. "I thought I'd be doing something else, something bigger, but, well, life doesn't always work out the way we expect, does it?" Alexander listened intently, his eyes never leaving hers. He had been so focused on building his career, on creating a legacy, that he hadn't stopped to ask himself why he was doing it in the first place. Listening to Maria's story made him realize how much he had taken his own privileges for granted. He had always been surrounded by wealth and opportunity, but he had never truly understood what it meant to struggle, to be constantly fighting just to survive. He felt a pang of guilt, but he pushed it aside. Instead, he wanted to learn more. He asked her about her hopes for the future, what she dreamed of achieving if things were different. Maria hesitated before answering. "I don't know," she admitted. "I've stopped thinking about what I want for myself. I just want my kids to have a chance to go to school, to do something they love. I want them to be happy, not like me." Alexander's heart ached as he listened. He understood, in a way, the depth of her sacrifices. He had always had the luxury of following his passions, of chasing success and fulfillment. Maria, on the other hand, had given up her own dreams to ensure her children had a shot at something better. "What if you didn't have to give up on your dreams?" Alexander asked, his voice soft but insistent. "What if you could have a life where you didn't have to choose between working yourself to the bone and having something more?" Maria looked at him, her brow furrowed. "It's not that easy, Alexander. You don't understand. I don't have the time, the money, or the resources to chase anything for myself. I'm stuck." "I understand more than you think," Alexander replied, leaning forward. "I've spent so much of my life building a company, a legacy, but I've realized that none of it matters if you don't have someone to share it with, if you don't have a reason to care beyond yourself." Maria was silent for a moment, her mind racing. She had never considered her life in these terms, never allowed herself to think beyond the daily grind of survival. But something about Alexander's words felt true. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a life that could be more than just a series of sacrifices. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conversation, laughter, and unexpected comfort. By the end of the night, they had both shared parts of themselves they had never shared with anyone else. They had connected on a level neither of them had anticipated, and in that connection something shifted. What had started as a chance encounter had evolved into something more, a bond that neither of them could ignore. As they parted ways that evening, neither of them knew exactly where this connection would lead, but they both felt deep down that something had begun to grow between them, something that could not easily be ignored or pushed aside. They were two people from different worlds, but for the first time they both believed that those worlds could somehow collide, creating something new and unexpected. As the days passed, the bond between Alexander and Maria deepened. What had begun as a chance meeting in the bathroom was now a growing connection that neither of them could deny. They continued to spend time together, coffee breaks, lunches, and after-hours conversations that allowed them to open up in ways they never had before. They shared their hopes, their fears, and even their darkest thoughts, slowly discovering a mutual understanding that transcended the worlds they came from. But as their relationship grew, so did the tension, especially for Alexander. He found himself caught between the life he had built, his career, his reputation, and the expectations of the people around him, and the feelings he was developing for Maria. He was falling for her, and it was a feeling that both thrilled and terrified him. Alexander had always been in control, always the one making the decisions, dictating the terms of every situation. But with Maria, everything was different. She was raw, real, and unpretentious, qualities that both fascinated and unnerved him. The more time he spent with her, the more he realized how disconnected he had been from the world outside his office. Maria was his window into a life he had never truly seen before, a life filled with hardship, sacrifice, and resilience. She had a strength that he admired, but it also made him feel guilty for the privileges he had taken for granted. Yet, despite all of this, there was an undeniable chemistry between them, one that pulled them closer together with each passing day. But with every passing day, the reality of their situation loomed larger. Maria's life was rooted in survival, working 2 jobs, raising her children, and struggling to make ends meet. Alexander's world, on the other hand, was one of luxury and excess, a world where he didn't have to worry about paying bills or where his next meal would come from. Their worlds were so different, it felt impossible for their connection to work in the long run. The first signs of trouble appeared when Alexander began to notice the reactions of his colleagues and friends. He was no longer hiding his interactions with Maria, and word had started to spread about the CEO, who seemed to be getting close to a cleaning lady. Whispers filled the air during meetings, and his business associates, people who had been his allies for years, began to question his judgment. Some joked about his unusual choice of company, while others were more direct, warning him about the potential damage to his reputation. "You can't be serious, Alexander," one of his closest business partners, Richard, said one afternoon after a board meeting. "You know how this looks, right? A CEO, the face of this company, getting involved with someone like her. You're setting yourself up for disaster." Alexander's jaw tightened, but he kept his cool. "I don't care how it looks," he replied, his voice low but firm. "Maria is a person, not some office worker, and she's nothing like what you're making her out to be." Richard shook his head, his expression a mix of concern and disbelief. "She's a cleaning lady, Alex. She's part of the staff, not your world. You're risking everything for something that's not even real." The words stung more than Alexander wanted to admit. He had always prided himself on being impervious to other people's opinions, but this situation felt different. The more people questioned his relationship with Maria, the more he began to doubt himself. Was he making a mistake? Was this something that could actually work, or was he just clinging to an illusion? At the same time, Maria was feeling the pressure as well. She had always known her place in the world, and that place was nowhere near the circles that Alexander moved in. She was a mother, a worker, a woman who had spent years sacrificing her own happiness for the sake of her children. She had never once entertained the idea that someone like Alexander, someone with power, wealth, and influence, could genuinely care about her. And yet, here she was, sharing her life with him, letting her guard down in ways she never thought possible. But as much as she enjoyed their time together, a part of her remained hesitant. She had seen what happened to people who reached beyond their station, who tried to cross the boundaries that society had set for them. It never ended well. Maria feared that in the end she would just be another temporary distraction in Alexander's life. And then there was her own sense of guilt. She wasn't sure she could accept a life that was so different from everything she had known. She was used to working hard, to surviving, and she couldn't fathom a life where she didn't have to constantly fight. She wasn't sure if she even wanted to escape the life she had built. Maria had never imagined a future outside of the routine she had created for herself. She had never allowed herself to dream beyond the daily grind. One evening, after a particularly difficult conversation at work, Maria made up her mind to distance herself from Alexander. The fear of their worlds colliding, of their connection being exposed for what it truly was, began to weigh on her. She knew that in the end, their differences would be too much to overcome. That night, after finishing her shift, Maria waited for Alexander in the hallway outside the building's entrance. When he arrived, she stopped him before he could speak. "Alexander, we need to talk," she said, her voice tight with emotion. About what? He asked, his brow furrowed in concern. I can't keep doing this, Maria said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't belong in your world. You don't belong in mine. You have everything, and I have nothing. I don't want to be the reason your life gets complicated. You've worked too hard to get where you are, and I don't want to drag you down. Alexander's heart dropped. He had been expecting this, but hearing her say it out loud made it real. Maria, don't say that, he said, stepping closer to her. You mean more to me than anything in this world. We can figure this out. She shook her head, her eyes filled with tears. No, Alexander, I can't be the person you want me to be. You deserve someone who fits into your world, someone who can handle the pressure of what you do. I'm just a cleaning lady. The words cut through him like a knife. It was clear that Maria was afraid of what this relationship could mean for both of them. He could see the doubt in her eyes, the fear that had been building up inside her. I don't care about any of that, he said, his voice full of conviction. What I care about is you. You're the one I want, Maria. I've never felt more alive than when I'm with you. But Maria took a step back, her heart torn between what she wanted and what she thought was possible. I can't, Alexander. I won't let myself be the reason everything you've worked for falls apart. With that, she turned and walked away, leaving him standing there, helpless and heartbroken. Alexander watched her go, knowing that this moment would be a turning point. One way or another, something had to give. In the days that followed Maria's heart-wrenching rejection, Alexander found himself in a state of turmoil. Her words echoed in his mind, each repetition gnawing at him. She believed she was too far removed from his world, too different to be part of his life. Her fears had convinced her that their bond couldn't survive in a world where social status and expectations had more power than genuine connection. The weight of her absence began to settle heavily on him. For the first time, he felt a sense of emptiness he couldn't fill with work or success. His days, once filled with meetings, presentations, and the hum of corporate life, now felt hollow. His heart was consumed by the thought of Maria, and every moment spent apart from her only deepened the ache. Despite everything that had happened, he couldn't accept her decision. He knew deep down that she was wrong. He had never cared less about the boundaries between them. He had never seen her as anything less than someone who deserved everything he had to offer. But now, with her pulling away, Alexander found himself at a crossroads. Could he let her go, accept that their connection was doomed from the start, or would he fight for what he knew was real? As the days passed, Alexander tried to immerse himself in work, throwing himself into projects and meetings in an effort to drown out the pain. But nothing worked. His mind always wandered back to Maria, her laugh, the softness of her voice, the way she looked at him with both kindness and wariness. Everything about her had become an essential part of his life, and he couldn't let go. Finally, one evening, after yet another lonely dinner at his penthouse, Alexander made a decision. He couldn't keep pretending like everything was okay when it wasn't. He had to see her, to speak to her, to tell her that he wouldn't give up on them. He walked out of his building and into the cold night air, heading towards the office. It wasn't the place he would normally go, but it was where he had first seen her, where their connection had begun. The building was quiet, most of the staff long gone for the evening, but he knew Maria would still be there, working into the late hours, as she always did. When he arrived at the office, he saw her, Maria, standing in the hallway, leaning against the janitorial closet, a mop in her hand. She didn't see him at first, and for a moment, he just stood there, watching her. The sight of her, so caught up in her own thoughts, made his chest tighten. He wanted to walk away, to respect her wishes, but he couldn't. Not anymore. Maria, he called out softly. She turned, her face momentarily blank before recognition set in. The moment she saw him, The walls she had carefully constructed around her heart seemed to go up in an instant. "Alexander," she said, her voice cold, guarded, "I told you." "I know what you told me," he interrupted, stepping closer. "But I can't let you walk away without fighting for this. I can't just pretend like nothing happened between us, like it was all some fleeting moment. You're wrong, Maria. I want you, and I want this, us, no matter what anyone thinks, no matter what anyone says." Maria opened her mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. She wanted to tell him that it wasn't possible, that their worlds were too different to ever make it work. She wanted to push him away, to protect herself from the heartbreak she was sure would follow. But the look in his eyes, the raw honesty in his gaze, made her falter. "I can't keep doing this," she finally whispered. "I can't keep holding on to something that doesn't have a future. It's not fair to you." "You don't get to decide that for me," Alexander said, his voice stronger now, filled with a determination he hadn't felt in a long time. "I'm the one who gets to decide what's fair and what's not, and I'm choosing to fight for you, for us." Tears welled in Maria's eyes, but she quickly blinked them away. "But what if I'm wrong? What if I'm just setting us both up for failure?" Alexander gently took a step forward, his hand resting on her arm. "Then we fail together," he said quietly. "But I'd rather fail with you than never try at all." For a long moment, Maria didn't speak. Her mind was a whirlwind of conflicting thoughts and emotions. She had built her life around survival, around making sure her children had everything they needed, and she couldn't see how this could ever fit into that equation. But as she stood there facing Alexander, the man who was willing to risk everything for her, something inside her began to shift. She wasn't sure what the future held, but in that moment she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't ready to walk away from him. With a shaky breath, she met his gaze. "I don't know what this is going to look like," she said, her voice soft but resolute. "But I don't want to lose you either." And in that moment, with everything else uncertain, Alexander knew that this was just the beginning of something worth fighting for. The weeks following their tearful confrontation marked a turning point in both Alexander and Maria's relationship. The barriers they had built, ones of fear, doubt, and societal expectations, began to crumble as they navigated the delicate balance between their vastly different worlds. But while they were growing closer, Alexander knew that they still had a long way to go. The pressure from his colleagues and family weighed on him, and the external judgments only made their bond more complicated. For Alexander, the stakes were higher than they had ever been before. His reputation, his career, everything he had worked for was on the line. People would talk, and they already were. He could feel the whispers in the corridors, the cold stares from people who thought he was making a mistake. And yet, none of that mattered to him. Not anymore. He had made his choice, and it was Maria. He wasn't going to let anything or anyone stand in the way of what they had. But Maria was still uncertain. She had come to accept the connection they shared, but she was terrified. She feared that this was all just a fleeting moment for Alexander, something he would regret once the novelty wore off. She had seen it happen time and time again. People from different worlds couldn't just slip into each other's lives without consequences. The scars of her past, the weight of her responsibilities were not easily ignored. She was still unsure how she could fit into his world without losing herself in the process. One evening, after another long day of dealing with both office demands and the persistent whisperings of those around him, Alexander decided he needed to show Maria in no uncertain terms that his feelings for her weren't a passing fancy. He needed to prove to her that their love was not just some fleeting moment, but something worth fighting for, something that could endure. The next day, Alexander made a bold decision. He canceled a series of important meetings and used his influence to arrange an unforgettable gesture, a public declaration of his feelings, not just for her, but for the world to see. He sent a message to Maria telling her to meet him at the office building that evening, just before sunset. When she arrived, she found him standing in the lobby, a smile on his face and an undeniable sense of purpose in his eyes. He was holding a bouquet of flowers, but it wasn't the flowers that caught her attention. It was the way he was standing there, looking at her with such a mixture of admiration and love. "Maria," he began, his voice steady and clear, "I know that we come from different worlds. I know that what we have doesn't fit into the neat little boxes that society tries to put us in. But I also know that I've never felt more alive, more myself, than I do when I'm with you. I'm not afraid of the challenges we'll face. I'm not afraid of the sacrifices I'll have to make. And I'm certainly not afraid of loving you, no matter who or what tries to stand in our way." Maria stood there, her heart pounding in her chest, her eyes brimming with emotion. She hadn't expected this. She hadn't expected him to go so public with his feelings, to make such a bold statement. And for the first time she realized that Alexander wasn't just in this for the thrill of the moment. He was in it for the long haul. Alexander stepped forward, gently placing the bouquet of flowers in her hands. "This is just the beginning," he continued, his voice low and earnest. "I want to spend the rest of my life with you, Maria. No more doubts, no more fear, just you and me." For a long moment Maria didn't say anything. She just looked at him, trying to process the weight of what he had just said. But as she gazed into his eyes, she knew, without a doubt, that this was it. This was real, and it was worth the fight. Finally she spoke, her voice shaky, but filled with emotion. "I'm scared, Alexander. I'm scared of what this could mean for both of us." "I know," he said softly, "and I'm scared too. But we'll face it together. I promise you, no matter what happens, we're in this together." And in that moment, all of her doubts, her fears, melted away. She knew there would still be challenges ahead, but the love they shared had already proven stronger than any obstacle they might face. Maria smiled, the first genuine smile she'd had in weeks. "Okay," she whispered, "okay, let's do this." With those simple words, Alexander knew they were ready to face whatever the future held, together. In the weeks that followed, Alexander and Maria found themselves more united than ever before. The gesture Alexander had made was not just a declaration of his love for her, it was the beginning of a new chapter in their lives. Their relationship, once a fragile thread, had now been woven into something stronger, something worth fighting for. They both knew that their journey wasn't going to be easy, but they also knew they were no longer going to let fear or doubt keep them apart. Word of their relationship began to spread, and while some of Alexander's colleagues still whispered behind his back, the whispers grew quieter. Those who had doubted him, who had mocked him for getting close to someone like Maria, started to see the strength of his commitment. Alexander wasn't just a businessman anymore. He was a man who had found something real, something worth more than all the wealth and status he had accumulated. And as people began to see how genuine and dedicated he was, their skepticism slowly began to fade. Maria, on the other hand, found herself stepping into a world she had never imagined. Though she had always been hesitant, even doubtful, about her place in Alexander's life, she had come to realize that her own strength, her own worth, wasn't defined by her job or her background. It was defined by the love she shared with him, by the way she had never given up on herself or her family. And now, with Alexander by her side, she felt more confident than ever before in her ability to navigate both worlds, the one she had come from and the one she had chosen to enter. Their time together was filled with quiet moments of joy, coffee breaks, long walks through the city, and evenings spent in each other's company, talking about everything and nothing at all. Alexander had started to see the world through her eyes, appreciating the little things he had taken for granted before. Maria, too, found herself growing in ways she hadn't expected. She began to dream again, not just for her children, but for herself. She realized that with Alexander's support, she could achieve things she had never thought possible. Despite the challenges they faced, Alexander and Maria never wavered in their commitment to each other. They continued to fight for their love, proving to themselves and to the world that true connection could transcend all boundaries. They learned to trust one another, to support one another, and to love each other without fear. And in the end, it wasn't their differences that defined them. It was the strength of their bond, a bond that had been tested by doubt, fear, and uncertainty, but had only grown stronger because of it. Their love was no longer a fleeting moment. It was a foundation, one they would build upon together for the rest of their lives. And as they stood side by side, ready to face whatever came next, Alexander knew that for the first time in his life, he was exactly where he was meant to be, with Maria in a world that was no longer divided by status, but united by love. Alexander and Maria had come a long way from their first unexpected encounter in the bathroom. What had started as a brief moment of vulnerability had transformed into a love story that defied every expectation. Their relationship had been tested by fear, societal judgment, and their own insecurities, but it was built on a foundation stronger than any of those obstacles: love, trust, and the willingness to fight for one another. Together they had proven that love could transcend all boundaries, whether those boundaries were class, status, or the limitations they had once placed on themselves. They had built something real, something that could withstand the pressures of their separate worlds. No matter what the future held, Alexander and Maria knew they had each other, and with that knowledge, they were ready to face anything. In a world that often feels divided by wealth, status, and expectations, their story is a reminder that love is the one thing that truly binds us all. It's not about what you have, but who you choose to share it with. It's about finding someone who sees you for who you truly are and accepting them for the same. As their journey together continues, Alexander and Maria have learned that love isn't just about the perfect moments. It's about facing the challenges together and building a life that is uniquely their own. If you've been inspired by Alexander and Maria's story, remember that love is always worth fighting for, no matter the obstacles. Don't let fear or doubt hold you back from pursuing what makes you truly happy. Take that first step, embrace your connection, and build the life you deserve. Are you ready to write your own love story? Don't wait. Start today. If you've been moved by Alexander and Maria's story, it's time to take action in your own life. Love, courage, and vulnerability are powerful forces, and no matter the obstacles, it's worth fighting for what you believe in. If you're facing doubts, uncertainty, or fear in pursuing your own happiness, remember that true connection transcends all barriers. Don't let anything stop you from taking that first step toward what truly matters. Reach out to those who matter to you, chase your dreams, and build a future that's worth living. Now is the time to make your own love story a reality. Like Alexander and Maria, you deserve a life filled with genuine connections and unwavering love. Are you ready? Don't wait. Take action today and start writing your own chapter of love, courage, and transformation. Share this story with others who need that reminder, and together, let's build the life we've always dreamed of. Leave a comment below to share your own story or what inspired you most from Alexander and Maria's journey.